I'm Gardner Morse, Senior Editor at Harvard Business Review, and I'm delighted to have John Quelch here with me today. John's been a professor at Harvard Business School since 1979, and he's known worldwide for his research on global marketing and branding. He's an author or editor of 25 books, most recently Greater Good, How Good Marketing Makes for Better Democracy. He's also a prolific blogger and frequent contributor to HBR and has the lead article in our April issue. It's called How to Market in a Downturn, which we'll be talking about now. John, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Gardner.
Okay, there are two broad issues that we want to get at. The first is consumer psychology in a recession. The second is how does an understanding of that psychology inform marketing strategy? So let's start with consumer psychology. Understanding what makes consumers tick, companies have been paying attention to this forever. What's different now?
I think what's different this time is the potential length and depth of this recession. In the recent Consumer Confidence Index report, the key indicator fell to 25. That is the lowest it has been since the Consumer Confidence Index was launched over 40 years ago. So this is a very, very tough downturn, and I think that the behaviors that consumers may have used in previous downturns to navigate their way through their short-term problems may not be a sufficient guide this time to what is going to happen in this particular recession.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the article, you suggest that the traditional ways that companies segment their customers, maybe by lifestyle demographics, aren't necessarily as relevant as segmenting them according to their emotional reaction to the downturn. Can you talk about the four ways that you suggest segmenting customers psychologically?
Yes, I'd say, first of all, to preface that the segmentation scheme that you've been using prior to the recession is obsolete, and that most companies need to go out and re-talk to their customers and reframe their segmentation approach. In the paper, what we say is that we've identified four types of consumer groups. The first group is a group that we call slam on the brakes. These are consumers who have really been devastated by the recession. They've either lost their job or they know someone who's lost their job. They've perhaps lost a lot of money in terms of a meltdown of their 401k valuation, and they are basically doing nothing at this stage but just buying bare necessities to get themselves from one week to the next. Everything else they've put on hold. A second group of consumers we call pained but patient. Yes, they have had difficulty, yes, they have had financial loss, but broadly speaking, they're optimistic for the longer term, and while they are adjusting their short-term consumer behavior, they are hoping to see light at the end of the tunnel. The third group we call Live for Todayers. The Live for Today group tends to be younger, more urban. They haven't saved that much, and therefore they haven't lost that much in the meltdown. Being single people, they're going to carry on with a fun-oriented lifestyle and not adjust their consumer behavior in response to the recession until the day they lose their job. And then their behavior will have to change overnight. And then the final group is what we call the comfortably well. These are people who have a sufficient cushion financially to see them through the recession. Alternatively, they may have been fortunate enough not to have been heavily invested in the market when it melted down. And as a result, they are pretty much carrying on as normal, though perhaps not exhibiting too ostentatiously the fact that they are well off. So these four groups we see as being very important in terms of enabling marketers to understand better how to respond to consumers and consumer psychology in this current crisis.
Now, your income doesn't necessarily place you into one of these groups.
That's correct. That's correct. Neither your demographic nor your lifestyle necessarily places you into any of these groups, except that I think it would be fair to say that the Live for Today crowd does tend to be a younger urban crowd.
Now, regardless of which segment you're in, you, as you point out in the article, you tend to divide the goods and services that you consume into categories of essentials or treats or dispensables or other categories. Let's use this framework to imagine a pain but patient consumer and how they might regard the goods and services that they consume according to these categories.
Right. So a pain but patient consumer would look at the essentials in their life. That would be, you know, basic food products and toothpaste, for example, things that they're not going to stop using. And they might say, well, is there a way of saving a penny here and a penny there while still carrying on and enjoying those particular items? So this is where you might see someone move from organic produce to non-organic produce at a lower cost, or you might see someone moving from a brand name paper towel to a private label paper towel. In the second category, we have treats. And what you might see there is, if we take, for example, Haagen-Dazs ice cream, you might see a pain but patient consumer deciding to indulge herself or himself less often in Haagen-Dazs. In other words, buying less quantity or buying less frequently. In the third category, we have postponables. These would be durable goods like automobiles or washing machines, for instance. And there the issue for the pained but patient consumer would be, do I buy a new washing machine if my existing washing machine breaks down, or do I hire someone to come and repair it? Prior to the meltdown, that pained but patient consumer might have said, I'll go out and buy the new washing machine and charge it to my credit card. Now that person might say, well, I think I can get another year or two out of this, and so I'm going to call the repair service to come out and fix it. And then finally, we have a category called expendables. And just as an example, a pain but patient consumer, let's say, might have been taking 2 vacations a year with the family. Let's say one of those might now be cut out. In other words, we simply as a family can't afford and don't need 2 family vacations a year, so one of them's expendable.
Let's talk about how marketers respond to this new psychology. Typically in a recession, companies will cut marketing across the board, but you say that that's a bad idea.
Companies vary considerably in terms of their cash position, and when credit is short, we know that cash is king. So we can't generalize, but what we can say is that if you're in a relatively strong cash position, a recession is a terrific time to try and gain additional market share. In some industries, other competitors who are cash strapped will have so little resource available, they won't be able to keep up their marketing and advertising activity. Therefore, for you as a cash-rich corporation, just keeping marketing at the same level will increase potentially your share of voice in the category in which you're competing. And if you can afford to do more than that, you may even be able to add further to your market share gains. It is axiomatic that it is less expensive to pick up 1 point of market share in a downturn than it is when times are good.
Let's talk about positioning for the recovery. That requires having a sense of what consumers are going to be like as we come out of this recession. What do companies do?
Well, that's a major conundrum, because the longer a recession is, the more time consumers will have had to adjust their purchase behavior, develop coping mechanisms that may actually become ingrained and habitual, such that when the recession is over and the recovery begins, the elapsed time may be such that consumers don't revert back to their former behavior, but rather they've talked themselves or managed themselves into a new normal, if you will, and that then becomes the consumer behavior going forward. So we can't automatically assume as marketers that consumers are going to snap back to their former selves when the recession is over. What we do know, I think, from previous recessions is that consumer appetite for new products and services that add value to their lives continues unabated. And therefore, if there's one message to get across to marketers, it is, in a recession, that's not a time to hunker down and forget about new product development. It is a time to focus new product development on services and items that are going to add value clearly to consumers' ability to do what they have to do for less money than they were doing it the old way.
That's great advice. John, thank you very much. For more of John's thinking on how to market in a recession and other topics, visit his blog, Marketing Know-How, at quelchblog.com, or read his article at hbr.org.